The sky turned an ominous shade of crimson as the first of the machines descended from the heavens. Massive robotic behemoths, their origins unknown, purpose unclear. But one thing was certain: they didn't come in peace. I stood frozen on my balcony, morning coffee still in hand, as I watched the alien invasion unfold before my disbelieving eyes. Continent-sized shadows rapidly spread across the Earth as the cosmic monstrosities took up positions over major landmasses and population centers. Overcome by a sense of surreal dread, I stumbled back inside and flipped on the news, desperate for information, for some sign that our military forces were mobilizing a counterattack. But the reporters looked as shocked and terrified as I felt. Shaky live footage showed swarms of smaller attack drones, bristling with advanced weaponry, pouring out of the motherships. The first bombardments began minutes later. I'll never forget the blinding flashes on the horizon, the thunderous booms that rattled the windows. The newscaster's voice rose in pitch, near hysteria, as reports flooded in of cities being reduced to rubble in mere moments. Our defenses, our technology proved utterly worthless against the invaders. As my own city's air raid sirens began their mournful wails, I sank to the floor, a yawning chasm of despair opening inside me. Tears streamed down my face as I realized this was likely the end, not just for me, but for all of human civilization. We'd finally encountered a higher intelligence in the cosmos, and they seemed determined to wipe us out. I thought of my family on the other side of the country, my friends, everyone I'd ever known or loved. Were they already gone? Vaporized in an instant by those soulless metal demons? Would I ever see them again, or was I doomed to die alone, cowering in my apartment as the world burned down around me? The building jutted violently, an explosion nearby. I squeezed my eyes shut, curling into a trembling ball. "Please, God, please, I don't want to die like this," I heard myself whispering. "I'm not ready." But God didn't answer. The only reply was the cold mechanical buzzing of the drones and the ceaseless thunder of their weapons dismantling my world piece by piece. As the light faded and the smoke thickened, I resigned myself to my fate, cursing the universe for the sick joke it had played on humanity. We'd spent millennia gazing at the stars, dreaming of contact, never imagining the nightmare that awaited us. My name is Mark Owens. I'm 36 years old. And this is the story of how I witnessed the fall of human civilization at the hands of a mysterious race of alien machines. The story of how I lost everything and everyone I ever cared about. The story of my final days on a doomed planet, waiting for the inevitable. Weeks passed in a haze of fear, grief, and numb shock. The machines never landed, never revealed themselves fully, but continued their systematic annihilation from the skies. I hid in the ruins of the city, scavenging what food and water I could, barely sleeping. Sometimes I encountered other shell-shocked survivors, hollow-eyed and filthy. We shared what meager supplies we had, swapped stories of what we'd seen. The devastation was the same everywhere. The armies of the world had crumbled in days. Governments collapsed. Humanity's reign over Earth had ended. In the absence of answers, wild theories circulated. Some thought the machines were a wrathful god's vengeance on our sins. Others speculated they were a doomsday weapon run amok, or that Earth's destruction was just collateral damage in some unimaginable interstellar war. I didn't know what to believe. All I knew was that the comfortable life I'd always taken for granted, the world that made sense, was gone forever. In its place was an apocalyptic nightmare populated by dust, debris, and the never-ending buzz of alien engines. As time went on, the attacks began to taper off, the machines perhaps satisfied that organized human resistance had been eliminated. An eerie quiet settled over the blasted landscape. Animals and birds slowly returned. I think that was the worst part, in a way. When the bombardments and terror were constant, there was no time to really process what was happening. But in the stillness afterward, the magnitude of it all crashed down on me. Everyone I'd known was almost certainly dead. Every place that had meaning to me had been erased from existence. I talked to myself constantly, trying to retain some grasp on sanity. I raged against the unfairness of it all, the meaninglessness. What had we done to deserve this? How could the universe let something so awful occur? My mind chased itself in circles, finding no solace. Sometimes I fantasized about fighting back, being a hero like in the movies. But that was pure delusion. What could one broken man do against a force that had crushed all of humanity's might in mere days? Deep down, I knew there was no resistance to be mounted, no 11th hour salvation. This was the end, and all that remained was to wait for death while bearing witness to our species' final days, to mourn all that had been lost. As the weeks became months, I felt my will to live ebbing. What was the point in going on if this was all that remained? An existence of scrabbling in the dirt, choking on the ashes of civilization, alone except for the pitiless gaze of our destroyers. I began to long for the anarchy of the invasion, the searing terror. At least that was a feeling. The aftermath was a numb grey fog of despair that clogged my lungs and made my limbs feel like stone. One day, I found a radio in an abandoned shop. Miraculously, it still worked. Desperate for any distraction from my maddening loneliness and sorrow, I spent hours searching through the static for voices, for any proof that I wasn't the last human alive. Finally, I found one, a faint flickering signal at the very limit of the radio's range. The speaker's voice was worn and tired, but it still sparked a small thrill in me. I called out to them, hardly daring to hope for a response. To my amazement, they replied. The voice belonged to a woman named Kate. She was holed up in a makeshift shelter a few dozen miles from my position. Like me, she was alone, the sole survivor of her group. We talked for hours, sharing our stories, marveling that we'd found each other in the wasteland. In the following weeks, Kate became my lifeline, the only bright spot in the smothering darkness. We talked every day, sometimes for hours. She was funny and tough and determined to keep living despite everything. Slowly, I felt my will to survive rekindling. We made plans to meet up, to combine our resources and watch out for each other. It was risky. The journey would expose us to the machines and other unknown dangers. But the thought of seeing another living human face to face, of not being alone anymore, made it feel worth it. The night before I was due to set out, Kate and I stayed up late on the radio, too excited and anxious to sleep. We talked about all the things we missed from the old world, all our hopes for the future, meager as they were. For the first time in months, I felt something like happiness stirring in my chest. But our conversation was suddenly interrupted by a sound I'd come to dread, the harsh buzzing of the alien machines. They were close, closer than they'd been in weeks. Kate's voice rose in alarm, then cut off abruptly in a burst of static. The radio went dead. I called her name over and over, frantically adjusting the dials in search of her signal, but there was nothing, only an empty hiss. Deep in my gut, I knew what had happened. The machines had found Kate. She was gone. I sank to my knees, utterly devastated. The one small hope I'd been nurturing, the dream of companionship and solidarity, had been snuffed out in an instant. I was alone again, more alone than ever. And I knew with grim certainty I would remain that way until my dying day. I knew I was living on borrowed time. Sooner or later, my luck would run out, or I'd simply lose the will to keep going. The end of my story was written, had been written, since the day the invasion began. All that was left was to wait for it, to bear witness to humanity's demise for however many days or months remained to me. Still, in my darkest moments, I looked up at the sky where the invaders lurked and whispered a question, though I knew there would never be an answer. "Why?" I asked them. "Why are you doing this? What did we ever do to you?" The machines, as always, kept their counsel, and eventually my own voice faded away too, swallowed by the colossal silence at the end of the world. In the end, I almost welcomed it when it came. The emptiness and despair had grown too heavy to bear, an unbearable weight crushing me into the dust. I was tired, so tired. It was a scouting drone that finally found me, its metal claws dragging me out of the rubble where I'd collapsed the night before, too weak and apathetic to seek shelter. I felt the wind on my face as it lifted me into the cool morning air, a sensation I hadn't experienced in ages. As we rose higher, I got my first clear look at the machine. It was a nightmare of whirring gears and gleaming chrome, its frame studded with lenses and probes and implements whose purpose I shuddered to imagine. It regarded me with about as much empathy as a butcher eyeing a slab of meat. "Do your worst, you goddamn tin can," I croaked, my voice rusty from disuse. "I'm ready. I'm done." The drone made no reply, just swept me over the blasted landscape toward one of the waiting motherships. Its vast shadow fell over me, blocking the sun, swallowing me in darkness. Inside was a labyrinth of pulsing conduits and thrumming machinery, the air thick with strange chemical smells and ozone. I caught glimpses of other captives in clear holding pods, men, women, even a few children, all limp and glassy-eyed. None of them screamed or cried or even moved. They looked like they'd already given up, like they'd retreated so far inside themselves that nothing could touch them anymore. I wondered if I looked the same, just a husk, emptied out by months of grief and horror. The drone deposited me in my own pod, slamming the hatch. I didn't resist. There was nowhere to run, and even if there had been, I no longer had the strength or will. At least it would be over soon, the dread and sorrow and crippling loneliness. Through the curving alien plastic, I saw the great ship's engines flare to life, felt the deck vibrate beneath me. We were accelerating, headed to some unknown destination. To what end, I couldn't begin to guess. But I was beyond caring. As blue sky gave way to starry black outside the viewports, I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. I wondered what, if anything, waited on the other side. Oblivion, perhaps. A respite from the nightmare my existence had become. I thought of everyone I'd lost. Family, friends, an entire world. I would have cried if I still knew how. Instead, I just let their faces parade through my mind one last time. Let myself remember what it was like to be held and heard and loved, to have a place to call home. I tried, I whispered to their memories. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Then I let it all slip away. The sorrow, the regret, the unanswerable questions. I let myself sink down into the darkness behind my eyelids, felt it rising up to meet me like an old friend. It was warm there, and quiet, and nothing could hurt me anymore. And as I finally surrendered to that soft oblivion, I almost thought I could hear the voices of the lost calling out to welcome me, to guide me home. Maybe it was just one final cruel illusion, a lie to ease me into the long sleep, but I embraced it all the same. And in the moment before the light winked out forever, I found something almost like peace. The peace of a journey's end, of laying down an unbearable burden after an eternity of struggling beneath it, the peace of letting go at last.